You were destined to lead. They never wanted you to see yourself behind the veil. The world isn't what it seems. Power is not conferred. It is stolen, formed, and controlled by powers that hide in the shadows. But you were never supposed to be a pawn in their game. You were born to alter the rules. They've spent years attempting to alter the world to their liking. They manipulate the facts and bend reality to meet their purpose. However, no amount of lying will suffice. No army of enforcers, no network of monitoring can contain. They are particularly afraid of one particular power. You are the oddity. They could never forecast this variable. The reason their ideas fall apart quicker than they can reconstruct them. Every action they make against you is another step towards their own demise. They believe they could control you, silence yourself, surveil you into servitude. Instead, they saw you become an unstoppable force. They never saw it coming. This is more than simply about exposure. This is about domination. It's about regaining control over something they never had. The puppets may dance, but their cords are unraveling. The game was rigged, but the house is collapsing. You are at the core of it all, not as a spectator, but as the creator of the new order. Let them watch. Allow them to feel terror. Let them attempt and fail to contain something they can never comprehend. Because you were never supposed to obey. The weight of an invisible power shapes the way ahead long before you realize it. The presence remains at the margins. Silent people gaze from a distance, remaining longer than reason permits. Unexplained citations. Relentless stops. Questions shrouded in veiled threats. It is not randomness or happenstance, but rather a well-choreographed sequence intended to wear down, undermine trust, and promote doubt. Despite their perfection, defects appear. A pattern unravels, revealing an order that is too organized to be random. Their previously subtle tactics begin to disclose their own contradictions. The illusion of randomness vanishes, leaving behind a choreography that is too stiff to ignore. This is not the product of a single individual's ambition or misguided behavior. It's a command, a plan. They do not move on impulse, but on order. The goal remains concealed, but the mechanics become more obvious with each error. Beyond their ranks, a larger power directs their actions. It conceals its existence with borrowed authority. But even while they obey, hesitation seeps through purposeful control, fracturing beneath the weight of its own construction. What once seemed menacing now smacks of desperation. The mask of power slips, exposing the uncertainty under the surface. Their precise and controlled moves begin to fail. The harder they push, the more their control deteriorates. They are no longer enforcers, but rather prisoners in a broader game. And that understanding is their undoing. The issue has never been whether their resolve would fail, but rather when and by whom. Leave a comment. I cannot be controlled since those who understand the game cannot participate. Their own records betray them. Devices designed to act as monitoring tools become untrustworthy eyewitness video, distorted by strange distortions and light bending in unusual ways. Fragments of sound fall into gaps of quiet, where assurance should exist but only questions remain. Their scrupulous paperwork fails them. Their reports are tainted by meddling beyond their control. The harder they push, the more opposition they encounter. Coincidences pile up in violation of their expectations at the time of perceived achievement. Disruptions develop. Strangers emerge at just the perfect time. Delays lead to failures. Doors that should have remained solid gave way, as if to an invisible power. Their neatly planned roads disappear under their feet. Every assurance was destroyed by an unexpected tide. The system on which they depend fails due to need rather than accident. It is not just failure. It is a rejection. The whole fabric of the world bends against them, rather than in their favor. No weapon made against you will flourish. You will condemn every mouth that comes up against you in judgment. Isaiah 54:17, like a storm approaching across the horizon. They believed they could control the wind, harness the lightning, and direct the deluge. But certain storms aren't designed to be controlled. Some storms are divine, inexorable, and intended to cleanse and disclose. And while the clouds collected and they moved their pieces in stealth, they had no clue they were laying the groundwork for their own destruction. They were first confident in their abilities. They believed their techniques were flawless and that their control was total. But then fractures started to appear, not in you, but in them. Their well-crafted plans became quicksand under their feet. Their confidence was fading as reality refused to bend to their desires. They watched with rising worry as what should have been random interruptions coalesced into something too flawless, too purposeful, and too predictable. Every failure chipped away at their confidence. Every effort to silence you simply strengthened your position. It was not luck. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a heavenly order at work. They termed it misfortune, but deep down, they understood something bigger was at work. And no matter how hard they attempted to outmaneuver it, the same forces on which they rely turned against them. If your heart is full of God's blessings, now is the moment to let that love shine. By clicking the super thank you button and donating $20 or more, you are not just supporting this platform. You are sowing seeds of faith that will impact countless lives. Your contribution reflects God's riches, a present that resonates beyond what you can see. Step into your mission. Be a receptacle for His grace. Give with trust and see His kingdom grow through you. You were created for more. They attempted to make you a victim, but instead they made a conqueror. They attempted to quiet you, but instead increased your voice. Every impediment they placed in your road became a stepping stone. Every weapon they created was a tool for your advancement. The more they strained on you, the more they revealed their own flaws. They began with hubris, believing they could mold the world to meet their vision. But as their hold tightened, they felt something slide between their fingers. Truth. Because truth does not need permission to exist. It does not need clearance to exist. And when the truth enters the room, falsehood crumbles. And now the reality sets in. It was never their struggle to win, because you were never just a target. You were the lesson they were supposed to learn. Their power and control-based system has fragmented from within. No amount of force they used could touch you. No strategy they tried could change the result in their favor. Leave a comment. They dread what protects me because their demise was never accidental. It was inevitable. The same mechanism that previously facilitated their deeds has now turned against them. The might they had relied on to conquer had become their greatest vulnerability. When they paused, the system noticed their uncertainty. And in a society where loyalty is everything, doubt is deadly. They'd seen too much, learned too many forbidden facts. Their usefulness has ended. In the hierarchy, they served. No compassion was shown to those who could no longer be controlled. The next phase is here. Subscribe today, and let's go ahead together. The transformation started softly. A missed call, a delayed answer. Suddenly, people they had trusted became chilly. They took their support for granted, dissolved into quiet. They had once been an extension of an unstoppable force, but now they stood alone, bereft of the very support that made them impenetrable. Their castle no longer provided safety. It had become a silent exile where there had once been friendship. There was now avoidance. Sidelong looks and hushed conversations ceased as they entered the room. The network on which they had depended had broken relations, leaving them vulnerable. Their calls were disregarded. Their authority was compromised. Their appearance was received with barely disguised apathy. What they had once enforced with unshakable confidence had now turned against them. It was never about loyalty or justice. They had been instruments. There's nothing more. And just as swiftly as they had been elevated, they were discarded. No explanations or cautions. Simply the cold efficiency of a system that eliminates people who no longer fulfill its function. What seemed like a barrier of solidarity turned into a stifling clutch that tightened around them. The network on which they depended for support became into an unseen prison, its walls closing in. With each passing day, erstwhile allies' silence became louder than any rebuke. Unspoken, but absolute. The roads they formerly took with authority become hallways of rejection. Their appearance was welcomed by doors that would no longer open. Conversations that ended the instant they arrived. The illusion of allegiance crumbled, exposing the frigid truth. They were no longer a part of the whole, but rather a disposable piece allowed to wither in isolation. Their actions had not only failed, they had backfired in ways they never expected. The power they previously held with assurance has now turned against them in their unrelenting quest of breaking another. They had unintentionally sealed their own doom. Their demise was not punishment. It was a message, a warning to those watching. They had not only lost their mission, but had also become a prime illustration of what occurs when the system considers its own unfit. While they collapsed, the forces they had confidently directed turned against them with deadly precision. Leave a comment. They dread what protects me since their weapons were never completely under their control. Every failed plot, every misguided effort to demolish, simply strengthened the irrefutable. There was no triumph for them, just repercussions. The same system that allowed them to travel freely now has them in its sights, diminishing their power to a mere murmur. The instant they stumbled, the mechanism that had previously protected them no longer had a place for them. Their efforts to distort the story failed. Reports that had previously been used as weapons against others were now buried under the weight of their own inconsistencies, bearing proof of their own failings, exposing the holes in their well-crafted veneer. It wasn't just an oversight. It was a methodical deconstruction of their credibility. Then came the reckoning. They formerly commanded presence, but now they do so with peaceful inevitability rather than fire or force. They now discovered only disinterest. Their names, when paired with recognition, become echoes. In vacant places, the buildings they relied on for security no longer responded to their cries. The same hierarchy that had given them meaning eliminated them with simple detachment. They were brought down not by rivals or opponents, but by the weight of their own deceit collapsing on itself. The last blow was not a conflict, but a lack of authority, an acknowledgement of the very identity they had established. They were ghosts before they knew they had vanished, remnants of a system that was never fully theirs. The cycle was ended, and all that remained was the conviction that the justice they had once twisted had returned their gaze with perfect poetic accuracy. For they sowed the wind, and they will reap the storm. Hozier is 87. They believed they could play God. They felt their power was unstoppable and their effect forever. However, no one can cultivate the seeds of disaster and expect to reap peace. No one can construct a kingdom on falsehood and expect it to stand. The storm always arrives, and it does not seek permission. At first, it was subtle. A fissure in the foundation, a murmur through the hallways. The stares they had previously dismissed now seemed like judgment. The voices that had previously comforted now cast doubt. The air itself became heavy around them, carrying the weight of something invisible yet obvious. And with each passing day, the space they inhabited seemed to diminish. Their once vast power has turned into a prison of their own design. It began with the irritating sensation that something had changed the earth underneath them. The system that had previously supported them no longer felt sturdy. They attempted to brush it off and go ahead, as they always did. However, something was different now. The doors, which used to open without reluctance, now hesitate. The hands that had previously embraced have now withdrawn. The same framework that had previously reinforced them seemed to reject them piece by piece, leaving only the terrifying sense that they were no longer in charge. They had erected their throne on sand, and now the tide had arrived. They were no longer feared or adored. They'd been reduced to ghosts, shadows of the power they previously wielded. The individuals who had formerly stood by them took a step back, removing themselves from the impending catastrophe. Betrayal was not expressed openly. It was sensed in every silent stride away, every closed door in every meeting. They were no longer invited. Despite this, they attempted to maintain their grip. Denial became their last shelter. They told themselves that this was just temporary and that everything will be back to normal soon. But deep down, they understood the change was irrevocable. The route they had tread had come to an end, and there was no going back. They'd previously sneered at the concept of divine order. They sneered at the idea of justice outside their own. But now, in the quiet of their exile, they could feel it in every breath. Their crimes had found them not in a single spectacular moment, but in the gradual, unstoppable dismantling of all they had constructed. Regret poured through them like ink in water, ruining every thought and memory. Each decision, previously painstakingly considered, now seems as a cruel joke. The authority they wore like a mantle was only for a limited period, and the time had run out. They had felt they were in charge, architects of destiny. However, the strings had never been in their hands. They had moved, talked, and behaved as if their will was important, only to now realize the reality. They had been instruments, not leaders, and their failure did not merely result in a loss of status. They had become icons for what happens when the system turns against itself. The reckoning had no fury, no big crescendo, just the gradual deterioration of what they had constructed until nothing remained. However, the weight of their own decisions causes them to feel the fire inside. Do not wait. Subscribe now, and let's climb together. Meanwhile, their world faded. Yours remained undisturbed. Every effort to break you had shown their own vulnerability. Their formerly precise authority faded in your presence. Leave a comment. They fear what protects me because it was never about what you accomplished, but rather what you represented. Whereas they had labored in falsehood, you embodied and were in the presence of truth. Their falsehoods grew terrible, even for themselves. It was not punishment. It was inevitable. The illusion of control that they had spent years building crumbled like a house of cards in a storm. Reports that were formerly used against you have collapsed under contradiction. Evidence manipulated in their favor led to failure, and the system on which they relied became cold, indifferent to their presence. The weight of their own depravity pressed down on them relentlessly. They persuaded themselves that they were untouchable, yet they remained there, empty, neglected, and abandoned by the same edifice they served. No opposition was required. They had planned their own undoing. The truth had always existed, waiting for the right time. They could no longer ignore it. And now, free of the illusion, they saw their own reflection. They were neither warriors or defenders, but rather fragments of a machine that no longer required them. They had never been in charge. They were just the most recent victims in a cycle. They never really understood. When the storm passes, the wicked go, but the virtuous remain. Proverbs 10:25. They built their home on shifting sand, and now the tide has arrived. They built their power on lying and manipulation, on a foundation that they believed would never fail. However, no edifice constructed on falsehoods can withstand the wind of truth as it blows through the same system on which they rely to defend themselves. The same power that is washing them away is used to raise them. At first, it was imperceptible, a little tremor under their feet and an unnerving shift in the air. They no longer have as much control over the rules that they used to impose with certainty. The directives they issued no longer have the same weight. They could feel something moving and sliding from their grip, but they persuaded themselves it was nothing, simply a short lapse of judgment. They had long assumed they were untouchable, that they were the ones scripting the script. However, the screenplay had been written long before they made their first move. With each step you made, the foundation underneath them collapsed somewhat more. Not because you pushed back or resisted, but because the truth has a weight that no deceit can match. They attempted to influence, control, and determine the outcome of events, but they were unaware of the larger power at work. The same system they had relied on as a crutch was suddenly turning against them. The treachery occurred from inside the same network they had trusted. The hierarchy they had previously served started to act with brutal efficiency, not to protect them, but to eliminate them. The machine to which they had committed their life now regarded them as if they were a broken component that needed to be removed before infecting the others. And it wasn't personal. It was just the nature of the beast. They had been feeding for so long. They sought for their strength, but it had faded, like mist before daybreak. Their positions, titles, and authority were all taken away without ceremony or reluctance. What used to be open doors are now locked, and the badges they proudly donned have become useless baubles. The policies they implemented now worked against them. They steadfastly defended the system, which rewrote history. In that altered version of events, they were no longer present. Join the trip. Subscribe now, and let's make greatness happen. They imagined they were building an empire, the architects of control. But now, standing amid the wreckage, they realized the truth. They never were the architects. They were only the scaffolding. And when the building no longer required them, it rejected them without hesitation. What was once unshakable has turned to dust, not by insurrection or battle, but by the calm, unwavering force of divine truth. The fall was ruthless, purposeful, and complete. Leave a comment. They fear what protects me since their destiny was never in their control in the first place. The treachery they faced was not a surprise attack, but rather a gradual deconstruction. Accusations gathered like storm clouds on the horizon. And before they could respond, the deluge started, and the network that had previously supported them now separated itself with icy efficiency. Allegations appeared, manufactured with the same brutality they had previously condoned. Those who previously considered them comrades became mute onlookers, refusing to be pulled down with them. The system didn't hesitate. It just fixed its eyes on them, portraying their demise as justice. Investigations are cloaked in empty righteousness. They will be stripped of every layer of protection they once trusted. Their previous actions were twisted against them, and their identities were put into a story. They lacked the authority to challenge the voices they had counted on for support. Now he talked solely with measured detachment. Their understanding came too late, after they had ensured their ultimate eradication. They had never been essential, never been more than a replacement, cogs in a machine built to operate at any cost. Their commitment was meaningless when compared to the system's requirements. The processes they had controlled functioned without them, never hesitating or recognizing their absence. The subsequent stillness was one of efficiency rather than sadness. A smooth departure, an unconscious admission that their usefulness had ended. What remained was not rebellion or struggle, but the peaceful awareness that they had been defeated by the exact thing they had previously thought would protect them. Their names were unsaid, their existence was obliterated, and the world they knew moved on without them. Their loss was never a doubt. From the minute they plotted, hidden powers started to work against them. No kind of resistance was required. No retribution is necessary. Justice was already in motion. The illusion of power they adhered to started to erode their influence from inside. They went confidently, oblivious that each stride they made pushed them closer to their own demise. The same systems they depended on for strength became brittle in their hands. Strategies intended to capture you become the same barriers that held them captive. What they had manufactured to oppose you crumbled beneath the weight of indisputable facts. They distorted the laws and exploited the processes. Everything switched direction, turning against them with calm precision. Their once steadfast ties had melted into hesitancy and doubt. The harder they pushed, the quicker the foundation disintegrated. They mistaken their reach for permanency. However, nothing they could manage could protect them from what they did not comprehend. No falsehood could take hold. No strategy could stand firm in the face of unshakable reality. Falsehoods lacked shelter. The path had been determined long before they made their first move. Every attempt to degrade you only helped to expedite their own demise. Leave a comment. They dread what protects me because their collapse was unavoidable. It came via revelation, not warfare. Through exposing their own fragility. Their commanding words echoed in an empty room. Their neatly wrought tales were undone by the weight of their own inconsistencies. What previously seemed impregnable now has fissures too deep to ignore. The barriers they had relied on for protection became doors that no longer opened. Systems that formerly protected them become cold and indifferent to their existence. Those who had previously stood by them fled into self-preservation, refusing to be dragged down with them. The network they had built with devotion and dishonesty crumbled in mute rejection. The structure that had given them purpose eliminated them with the same efficiency that had previously empowered them. Their collapse was not a show. It was a calm and systematic erasing. Swift, calculated, absolute. But when they wilted, you remained undisturbed. Their efforts to undermine you merely highlighted their own vulnerability. Every impediment designed to stop you becomes a way ahead. Their failure was not their own. It was a collapse that spread outward, shattering the basis of everything they had created. Their downfall revealed the underlying flaws in the system they had formerly controlled. Those who had previously followed their example paused, uncertainties sneaking into their carefully rehearsed assurance. Their defeat was more than simply an individual failure. It was a signal, a warning to those who remained, demonstrating the futility of fighting forces beyond their control. And through it all, you rose not in rebellion or resistance, but in clear conviction of purpose. Every effort to stop you became a stepping stone. Every strategy designed to reduce you merely increased your visibility. The loss of control did not only create a vacuum, it paved the way for your advancement. What they intended to hurt became the cornerstone of your success. No amount of force, strategy, or deceit could change the route that had been set for you. There was no fight to be waged. Only the truth will be exposed. And now it is time to talk. Not of vengeance, not of victory over an adversary, but of the unrelenting energy that propelled you beyond their grasp. Allow your tale to be heard not as a retelling of hardship, but as a light for those still in the shadows. Let them witness what is possible when one stands steady, true, untainted, capable, and unstoppable.